really a question for both of you, Sue and Mark.
Yeah, and before you answer that question, I just wanted to point out that, I don't know if it was in the bio, but Mark's traveled to 4 continents. How many countries?
30 countries, 4 continents, and over 400 cities.
400 cities for research. And so there's a wealth of information here, which is why I'm so thrilled that you're here. Mark and I go back a little bit, so, but I have a lot of respect for Mark, and he really brings a lot to the table for this discussion, so, yeah.
I didn't say any of that. I'm glad you did. Well, I guess,
You can start since I was just
So,
talking.
will you ask that question one more time?
sure, what are you seeing in other communities, you know, locally and nationally in terms of investing in public space and what are they reaping benefits?
Really, each community kind of has its own programming and desires. They're at different steps in the overall process. For example, we are involved in downtown Milford. If you've ever been out to there, they too started kind of a small town, a lot of pavement, not pedestrian. And over time, it is really now becoming infill. And everybody kind of want to live so that they can walk to everything. So that connectivity that you guys are dealing with, that's kind of the next layer. They're lucky, they're near Kensington Park. So now they've got a system where you can get on your bike, ride to the park. You can, people can come from other communities and park at a lot, enjoying that system. The Huron River is right at their door. A lot of communities, downtown Fenton, are starting to take advantage, and maybe a bunch of you have gone kayaking and starting to discover that, you know, waterway system. So that's kind of their story there. Our office is in downtown Northville. We've worked in downtown Northville. They're looking kind of like what you said, Mark, kind of they started with the core, which you guys did with that, you know, your pavilion and your park. They started with their town center, started again kind of a strong authenticity to their design, and now they're going around the rest of their city and trying to enhance different areas. So every place kind of is on a different program, but I guess the big idea is, number one, as I mentioned before, is whatever they do, they're understanding that they've got a budget to take care of it. It's gotta be durable. Northville programs 35 events in the summertime a year, so there's a lot of programming and understanding when they do these designs, how to accommodate the parking, the crowds, all that. So there's a lot of flexibility going on in a lot of towns too, because like I said, we don't know what the next, you know, emphasis will be. So we're trying to, again, create these spaces that are very flexible.
I'm just gonna, one little point about downtown Northville. So when that streetscape went in, there was a lot of consideration in adding to it and making sure that those sidewalks were extra deep. And I worked in downtown Northville for the Downtown Development Authority for a few years. Those are just filling in. I mean, I think it's been in the last 5 years that those potential spaces, or I should say the use potential has really been reached. They're just hitting that critical mix of retail and restaurants and activating those bump outs that they planned for outdoor seating when the buildings that were fronting them were really, you know, owned by folks who've just been doing things for the same way a long time. And once those buildings or businesses changed hands, people came in who really took advantage of entire lobes of that streetscape and really maximize leasing city park space. And, you know, I'm thinking of pools, Center Street Grill. There was nothing there in that bump out. That was a decision made in downtown Northville to build this huge jutting sidewalk that no one really could imagine why. And it happens. If you build it, it happens. People come.
Well, I would, to get to the point of, I think the core of the question is really what's going on around here in this city, in Metro Detroit, you know, Birmingham, other places, downtown, and then beyond. Of course, my experiences in travel is what I'm seeing beyond. I've throughout my career, you know, I'm an architect, but I'm an urbanist, and so I've studied cities from the building to the public space. And what I've seen over the course of 30 years of travel study and work is an evolution of really serious focus on the importance of public space. It's more important now than it, in my opinion, than it's ever been in my life, at least my awareness of this kind of thing. It's increasingly important, and I mean not only public space by way of squares and parks and those kinds of things, but also just the general infrastructure of the street and the sidewalk and really where people traverse through a city, a downtown neighborhoods, what have you. Public space and placemaking has become really a criteria of high priority. And that really is mostly because people are really demanding it. They're asking for it, they want it. They're choosing to move to places that have that. They're choosing to move their offices to places that have that. That's a really critical part of decision-making today. Neighborhoods that are walkable, that have sidewalks and crosswalks and big trees and front porches are in high demand versus ones that don't. Downtowns are in high demand versus places that don't have downtowns, and same with office and recreational all across the board. And that's a fundamental point, and I'm seeing that across the world. You know, I've been traveling for many, many years, and I go to places that I've been years ago, places like London and Berlin and Paris, such that I was at in the 1980s, and then I go a few months ago. I was just in Lisbon a few weeks ago, and I was in Lisbon 15 or 20 years ago, and the public spaces there are significantly enhanced from where they were years ago. There's a main public space in Lisbon, if you ever know Lisbon, right on the waterfront, that when I was there 15 years ago was a parking lot. And this is a premier primary location in the center of Lisbon, right on the waterfront, terminating the main street, Rua Augusta, that terminates in this with this grand arch and arcades all around. It's like the Piazza San Marco in Venice. And yet it was a parking lot, literally a parking lot. And I was just there a few weeks ago, and it's now an incredibly important grand space, completely oriented toward people, and there's absolutely no cars anywhere in the space. It's totally transformed because the importance now is significantly different than the importance was then. And you'll see that across Europe, you'll see that in Asia, you'll see that in places. And coming back to Detroit in the satellite cities that we're in, I'm seeing that again and again. In Birmingham, in the last 10 years, we've invested significantly in Shane Park, and Booth Park, and Barnum Park. Some of our key parks in the center have been invested in significantly to enhance the pedestrian experience, primarily as assets for the neighborhoods as well as the downtown. And similarly, we see it in Northville, we see it here in town, that you've created your central space, which is newer. I'd say that it wasn't here. I've been coming to Farmington my whole life as well, and I know what was there for many years, and now I know what's there now, and it's significant enhancement. And for those of you who spend a lot of time downtown, like me, of course, my office is downtown. The downtown public spaces, I mean, Campus Martius, what's more to say? It's one of the premier public spaces in the country. And I'm there, my office is a block and a half away. I'm there all the time. It's constantly active. It's constantly pristine. It's programmed incredibly well. And the latest space that I'm in all the time, and I was there this morning, of course, having a coffee and looking out on the space, is Capitol Park. Capitol Park is the best public space, in my opinion, probably in all of the Midwest, and maybe one of the top public spaces in the entire country. The way it's enclosed, the articulation of the buildings, the scale, the quality of the public space and the buildings around it is incredible. And it is phenomenal space, and I can tell you, I've been working downtown for 30 years, and that was an incredibly bad place not long ago. And it's now the best place, in my opinion, in downtown. So public space is at a high premium now, and I think cities need to recognize that and do whatever possible to enhance programming, the articulation of it, the design, and the way that the perimeter is used. Because I think that's the last thing I would say about that is a public space really is important, but what's even more important is what surrounds it. And that perimeter is really critical, absolutely critical, and probably more critical than what you do with the space itself. And I'll just make one last example on that is the Michigan Municipal League was downtown this past week, the convention for the Michigan Municipal League, which I'm a member, I think a number of us are probably members. And I was asked by the CEO to take a tour, to tour around some people from Malaysia and from out of town through the downtown. And they wanted to go down by the waterfront. So we went through Campus Martius, went through Capitol Park, and walked around, and then we wanted to go to waterfront. And we were over across Jefferson, we went into Hart Plaza. And Hart Plaza is significantly less active than any of the other public spaces in downtown. And it's not that I mean, granted, it was built many years ago, and yeah, it's a little bit run down, but the real fundamental problem with Hart Plaza is that it's not surrounded by anything. There's nothing adjacent to it. And it's far and difficult to get from where the people are to that space. So you have Jefferson, you have the river, you have Cobo Hall, which is, which is rarely active. I mean, it's active when it's active, but it's often not active. And then you have the Renaissance Center, which is very, very active, but it's completely disconnected because of the tunnel and the security issues and such. So you have this great public space with these great views and a great location in the center of everything at the absolute foot of Woodward Avenue, and there's nobody there. And why is there nobody there? You go 3 blocks north, and Campus Martius is teeming with people. And why is that? Because it's adjacent to thousands and thousands of people in restaurants and cafes and all that, right across the street. So the adjacency of what we call the urban room or the enclosure is as important or more important than what you do with the space itself. And that's, I think, one of the key things that when we talk about public space that needs to be thought about is it's land use, it's the density, it's the uses of the mixed use of buildings in their direct adjacencies that contribute significantly to the quality of the public space. It's not just the public space, and I don't care how many trees that Sue and her team can put in there and how beautiful it can be. There's a limit to what that can do without I guess the whole package, if you will. And that's what really makes those places become excellent.
I've got just a follow-up question for both Mark and Sue, from a regional and maybe then more international perspective, because each of you basically referenced the fact that this phenomena of people demanding these kinds of public spaces is something that has grown over the past several decades. And I know you're both design nerds, but if you could maybe take that hat off and put on your social hat, your psychological hat, and what is it that's going on in societies that is driving people to start to want these public spaces and demand these public spaces where they live, work, and play?
Here I go. Well, it's kind of fun because in addition to working on the downtowns, we're also struggling and working with many shopping centers that are really trying to understand what do they do, how do they evolve. And a big component that they're now adding on to these is they're losing their stores is all about entertainment and social experiences. And what we're finding is people are really wanting to reconnect, and have that social experience where they can go out and, participate in, like you said, workshop, play, but have all of that, and they're finding that they're missing that. So even like the shopping centers are bringing in, and you've seen it, bowling alleys, million restaurants, just all of that to kind of provide that
An aquarium.
Aquarium, right?
Great Lakes.
And we worked on that project too. But we're really finding that's key. And I want to just briefly go back to Mark talking about how many trees, the whole bit, but when we worked on the downtown long ago together, people want to be entertained, okay? And like you're saying, the perimeter. But when you're walking down the street, you run into just a couple stores where there's nothing going on, you turn around. It's just human nature. When you're driving into a place you've never seen before, you're looking to see where are the people. Where, I remember being with my dad, what restaurant should we stop in when we're out on a vacation? Where's the people? So that's all kind of drives it together, as you say. But we all want to be entertained, we want activity. So that's a big component of the design, getting, that momentum, that entertainment, and then the people come.
Well, I would just add, and I think that I agree with all of those points. Demographics are, as we know, if you look back in time, there's generations and there's different priorities and different things that people are interested in, and there's always this sort of attempt to look at something differently, or to we never go along a straight line of interests and activities. I mean, we don't necessarily all like the same food that everybody liked back, in 1965, and same entertainment and all that. So there's always sort of a fluctuation and a growth and change. And I think that we went through the world of going to malls, and we went through the world of spending our time in introverted and these unique places that came about in the late 50s and early 60s, and that was really new and fresh and interesting, and it hadn't been done really in that way before. And so we sort of all grabbed onto that, and we sort of got that out of our system, and now we're looking for, I think, other things. But also, I believe in the importance of the time-tested ideas and time-tested concepts. And what I think that is more important than sort of this idea that we have trends that we come in, and I wouldn't say that this trend that we're seeing in support of downtowns and cities and urbanism and walkability and pedestrianization, all that is going to go away, because I think that we, as a society, and even around the world, many places, especially in North America, really lost sight of the time-tested ideas of place and the importance of where people lived. Now, as we were building in the post-war world, in North America, Canada, and here in the United States and other parts of the world, we were building places really for car-oriented environments. The rest of the world was still, the places that were built many, many years before, were still walkable, urban, and pedestrian oriented. And we sort of never Venice and London and all these places really were never not Venice and London. They were always pedestrian oriented. They were 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 80 years ago, and 100 years ago, and 1,000 years ago. And so that there's a connection between those environments and the people that live in them that stood the test of time. And I think that what we're finding is we sort of had that 100 years ago, when people lived in cities and took streetcars and went and shopped downtown and those kinds of places, and we lost that with a different kind of built environment, a different kind of mindset. And we're essentially, in my mind, we're regaining the recognition and the importance and the understanding of that. And it's essentially, it's coming back to an understanding that was actually not a bad thing, and that was a good thing, and we're now seeing it being embraced and now built for the interest. So I think it's more of a correction, if you will, than it is a new trend that's going to go away in 20 years or something. I think we're back on the track. We lost track, and we're back on the track, and hopefully we'll stay here for as long as I'm around anyway.
When we started, Sue used the word authenticity, and I think that there's authenticity is something that people are yearning for, and if that's hearkening back to an earlier time, maybe a simpler time, I actually think that with what we've done here in Farmington over the last 15 years, we've brought back authenticity to our downtown, because we're uniquely Farmington.
Kate, anything to add to that? You've been sitting so quietly in the corner, I'm gonna pick on you. I grew up in Detroit, and my family had businesses in the neighborhood, and everything we needed was walkable. Bakery, the grocery store, anything you want. And so I think in my mind, I moved to Farmington for that same thing, to be able to walk to the grocery store and to the pharmacy or the theater, or all those things were in a neighborhood, including a roller rink, which we spent a lot of time at. But I think that's part of it. I think boomers naturally gravitate towards it. I just sold a couple's house in Farmington Hills. Well, not just sold it, about 2.5 years ago. They moved downtown into a condo on Riverfront, And I ran into them last summer with Kathy eating at a restaurant, and they said, well, they sold their car because the queue line's in and they don't need it anymore. And they're so happy to be downtown and living where they're living now. So, and they're 82 and 84, by the way. So it's definitely a trend. But all right, moving on. The DDA is a tax capture district. And we started to talk about that a little bit when I started, because a lot of people don't understand what that means. And we run a TIF. Does anybody know what that means too? So we're gonna throw a whole bunch of them at you, DDA, TIF. How can investing in public space return the investment if it's not a direct turnaround as TIF generating? So in other words, the DDA bought Dimitri's, fixed it up, turned the parking lot into a public parking, and then leased it to a restaurateur with an option to buy, and after 2 years they did so well, they're still here in our downtown, and we created some TIF. But with the Grand River Streetscape, we didn't necessarily create TIF with that investment, but what happened is all of the businesses filled up and improvements happened to those businesses and still are happening. So, but I'm gonna let you answer this one, Kate.
Sure, I think we can attribute upward of 70 businesses with either a direct or thin line association to that Grand River streetscape improvement.
Easy for you to say.
Yes, locating here downtown or within walking distance of that streetscape. I think that, going back to investing and building that space, you do attract a different kind of business or interest or public activity, and that goes along lines with what we've been saying. Retail, I think, looks for good environment as well. And Mark, you had you put something on Twitter, was it last week maybe, talking about experiential retail. I think there's this pervasive myth that retail is dead, or for example, Dress Barn. Jen McKee wrote a very nice love letter to Dress Barn.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. As part of our Metro Mode series that we're doing, and talking about people and places and the stories of downtown Farmington and what makes us really a great space to be. So the article that you had shared specifically cited Dress Barn as a national chain that's on the wane. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the success of our branch or our store in downtown. In fact, our store's demographic slice is really an anomaly. It serves a wide variety of people. It's not the typical demographic that just shops elsewhere.
One of the higher performing stores.
It's a very high performing store, and their sales doubled the week that the public heard that the corporate level was making the decision to close it. So, and we haven't even broken a sweat about replacing them. We're sad that they're going, of course, because they're such a piece of the community, but we know that we've had tremendous interest in being in that location, in which we've invested. That's another streetscape on Grove Street, and a large facade grant that the DDA helped with, that developer and building owner in coming in. And it's changed hands. So in the past 18 months, I would say 25 to 30% of our square footage downtown has changed hands in the form of large property owners, REITs. The downtown Farmington Center was sold, and that's everything from Lizzie's to Fresh Time, and then wrapping up to Starbucks, and then coming up Farmington Road. So that's really significant. That's a family operation from California. They own property in 16 states. This is their first venture to Michigan, and they really like what they see. They think that's an under-realized opportunity and a great market at a great price. So we're really bullish on things to come in the next several years. We believe that retail is really strong, and as you cited, experiential retail, that third space, that gathering space, whether it's your favorite store downtown, you're buying cheese, you're buying shoes at a new store, a store that's been there for 30 years, and this is their third or fourth generation running it, like our Village Shoe Inn. It's an icon. I think that sign might be on the National Register soon.
I guess since you brought up retail, I'll just make a comment about that. One of the areas that I think is really key to making cities, obviously you're pointing it out, one of the things that makes downtown and neighborhoods, as you said, in your neighborhood, walking to a corner store, what have you, is the retail component. And it's really a critical part of any urban environment, especially pedestrian oriented, where you wanna have a really great pedestrian experience. So I've taken on retail as one of the things I really look at when I'm studying cities around the world. And part of that is that I'm involved in a lot of retail. My position in Birmingham, we have a lot of retail. We have 2.2 million square feet of retail in our downtown. I'm sorry, we have 1.5 million square feet of retail in our downtown, 2.2 million square feet of office in our downtown. So we're quite a sort of a mixed center. But we do a lot of ordinance changes and refinements to enhance the retail, and I'm involved in a lot of that in terms of, glass and frontages and uses and things like that. But I also, as an architect, I've done a lot of mixed-use projects and design retail spaces. And then lastly, my partners and I are involved in owning retail spaces, as I think you mentioned in my bio. So my partners and I own the Pure Detroit stores. You may know the Pure Detroit stores. We have 6 of those, and we have a number of other different stores in the Fisher Building, the Guardian Building, the Renaissance Center downtown. And so we understand retail quite well, and we understand small retail, and we understand independent retail, because it's all independent. It's owned by local people. They're all small spaces, and they're all in urban context, walkable urban contexts. So it's an important thing, when I go to London or Paris or Shanghai or wherever, I happen to be, I'm always looking at retail and how it activates the street. And it's really very, very incredibly important that retail is on the street, that there is some level of retail, and it's not office space. It's so critical that it can't be and shouldn't be office space. Office space at street levels in downtowns kills the street. They're closed on the weekends, they're closed at night, and half the day you don't want to be looking at somebody typing on a computer or their cords hanging from their desk. So it's a really big negative, and I strongly suggest looking at ordinances that prohibit office in the core areas where you really want it to be pedestrian oriented. It's actually critical, because towns, if you go to any downtown that has a lot of office on the ground floor, you'll see that downtown is not very active. In fact, it's dead. It's not a place you want to be as a pedestrian. So that's sort of, my side note on that. But what I see critical around the world, and this is all across the world, in recent years I've been from Shanghai to all over Europe to all over the United States, and I see small, independent retail spaces in downtown areas thriving all over the place. Small independent retail. When you read the New York Times and they tell you about the retail apocalypse, they're really talking about things that are antiquated, things that haven't changed, things that haven't kept up, and usually overbuilt. It just, was it Forever 21? I was just listening to an interview about that this morning or yesterday or whatever, talking about how they overbuilt too quickly, they expanded too quickly, they didn't hit the market that they needed to. They're in like 50 countries or something. I mean, this is where, when you see all the retailers closing, whether it's Lord & Taylor or Penny's or Sears or any of these people, or Forever 21 or any of these, it's usually more of a chain, a national, or someone who didn't keep up with the times. It's not that the internet's killing them. The internet is barely 10% of every dollar spent. People don't realize it. They think the internet is taking over and it's 50% or 70% of retail. It's not. It's 1 out of $10 goes to the internet sales. $9 is brick and mortar stores. And that's a fact. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. So the reality is brick and mortar stores aren't going anywhere, in my opinion. All across the world, I don't see empty spaces all over the place, but I do see independent, small, a lot of local and unique and interesting shops in the streets of Paris, in the streets of Shanghai, in the streets of Berlin, in the streets of Luxembourg, wherever it is.
And Detroit now.
And now Detroit. You go to Capitol Park, where I mentioned, you walk the perimeter of Capitol Park and you will see not one chain. You will see all independents, and they're small, and I mean 200 square feet, 400 square feet, 600 square feet, 1,000 square feet. This is retail in the world. It isn't 8,000 square foot dress barns, nothing against them, but
11,000.
See? It isn't, that is not the norm. That is an atypical situation, and that is struggling, truly. Because I think we're in an adjustment, well, I know we're in an adjustment, but it doesn't mean brick and mortar is going away. It's just changing, and frankly, in my opinion, it's changing for the better. And it's changing in an urban context. Partially, what you're seeing is the malls that are really hurting, because they're big and they're chains. And that's not what's not doing well. I've been working on the Lakeside. This one of the projects that we've been working on is the rethinking of Lakeside for the city of Sterling Heights, one of my urban design projects. It's exactly what we're talking about. Rethinking Lakeside into a mixed-use environment with very, very different context than 8,000, 10,000, 15,000 square foot chains that are, just one store out of 4,000 around the world. That's just not where retail is going. And I think it's a good thing. I embrace it, and I look forward to it because I think it's better for us.
Well, and you mentioned it's an adjustment. If you look at retail for centuries and centuries, it was all mom and pop shops. It wasn't conglomerates. A person would make something and sell it at their street level shop, and they would live upstairs. It's the quintessential mom and pop shop, and that spans cultures and generations. And centuries, and that model's been around all over the world. So in some ways, we're moving in that direction.
It's kind of exciting to see Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials with the entrepreneurial spirit that we're seeing now, and starting businesses from distilleries to breweries to all kinds of different things. And I think that's a new wave that just feeds right into what we're talking about here.
Aren't those the coolest places to be?
They are.
mean,
They
really.
absolutely are.
When you opened up the Pure Detroit stores, really it was a retail desert in a lot of the neighborhoods, say from New Center, which was a former flagship retail area. I'm trying to think where the couple of the was that the first store in the Fisher Building?
Our first store was started by one of my partners, Sean Santo, and she started it in 1998 in the 28-story Dave Whitney building, which is now the Aloft Hotel. And it was in an old tobacco shop that was 500 square feet. It was the only space open in the entire building. 28-story building, and it had a little space, 500 square foot. Everything else was empty. The building was empty, and Woodward was empty, and downtown was empty. 1998, Pure Detroit. It was a very different world. But we believed in urban retail, and we believed in the city, and we believed in promoting the city, and that's what Sean's idea for that store was all about. So it's really, it's a local, we all lived in the city. We believed in the city, and we wanted to do something to promote it. We were doing it architecturally and urbanistically. My partner Kevin was Sean's husband, and Sean, she just started this because she loved the city. And so this is the entrepreneurial spirit. This is what we, and then we grew from there. So, the Guardian Building, the Fisher Building, the Renaissance Center, now on Alexandrine. We have a place on the aquarium in the Belle Isle. I mean, these are all entrepreneurial. They're all small. They're all owned by us, which is the local people, and it's very hands-on. And so I obviously have a bias, but this is what I see. So it's just surely beyond me and what we've done, but it's what I see in the streets of these cities all over the world. And I think, as Steve said, this is where I think the excitement is, and I think this is where the future is. And I think less and less we'll see the sort of, faceless, non-unique, global type corporations. I think they're gonna have more and more struggle. Doesn't mean they're gonna go away, and I just think that they'll be different. And there'll be a lot more opportunity for, I think, young people. And we're seeing that in the city, no doubt about it. Anybody who hasn't been to Capitol Park, go to Capitol Park and walk the perimeter of Capitol Park, and you'll see one after another after another. Very small, very cool, well-designed, great product, both food and product, not just food. It's terrific.
The
And it's a
Detroit Bike
perfect example.
Shop. Yeah.
The Detroit Bike Shop, which I
yeah.
have one. of
Yes,
course.
yeah, they're building them right there.
There's a pet
and,
store, there's a couple
They're
clothing
currently
stores.
offered in Fagel colors.
Awesome, yeah.
Okay, if you're interested.
Great store, absolutely.
All right. I don't know that we answered the TIF question, but we'll move on. Well, the money that we capture, it goes towards the streetscape and creating connectivity and the crosswalks and all the things that are part of that. So it may not create TIF, but it definitely creates the environment where retailers want to show up and have that audience, so.
Actually, I'd beg to differ with that. I do believe that it creates TIF, because we've seen it here in Farmington. We've seen investment, and we're continuing to see. That's why the budget for the DDA, we have a very positive outlook on what's to come because of TIF growth that is due, in my opinion, in direct response to the place that Farmington has become over the last 10 to 15 years. It is a destination, and it's a desirable place, and businesses want to locate here, not only retailers, but also offices and residential. Hopefully we'll get into that in a little bit. We've got a couple of projects on tap coming up, but that's all new TIF generating revenue that, in my opinion, is a result of the investments that have been made.
I stand corrected.
In my opinion.
Okay. Speaking of time, we're pushing up on, I think, an hour here, are we not? And so we've got a couple more questions left, but I do want to get to Q&A, because I assume we've got some questions out there. Let's move to the last one. Why does good design matter to a downtown community? So I think you kind of answered that, and I think you answered the next one, Mark, which is, how can good design foster placemaking and strengthen the connection between people and the place they share? So I think we've kind of covered that. The connectivity, I think, is the big thing here, is how do you get to these public spaces and what are you passing when you get there? So, Kate, would you like to add anything, or should we move on to Q&A?
We can move on to Q&A. I would say good design, I think, is not only beautiful, it's aesthetically beautiful, but it also functions well. I think Sue's point, just to go back to that, the minute detail that you mentioned about the flexibility of investing in public space too. Even though we think of Grand River, for example, is a pretty hard definition as a major corridor. We have a few examples where we have flexed in and out in adapting some of the hardscape and landscape to accommodate things like outdoor seating or a crosswalk or uses that businesses bring in, and wonder if they can do that sort of thing. So I've had conversations in the 2 years that I've been here on whether we can install a garage door on the front of just a basic building. Of course we can. We'll help you do it. Maybe we'll give you a grant.
If I could, because I think it's a very important question, because I think design often gets lost in the discussion of city building. And I've had the pleasure of working with Sue, Rizomets, and her partners, Paul and Randy, and they're very, very, very good at what they do. And they've done some great, not only the work that you've done here, but as well in Northville and elsewhere. And I'd just be curious to hear her point of view on design, and how, because I think you talk about landscape and you talk about, street paving, and you already mentioned some of that, but I just, personally, if I could interject, I'd like to hear her point of view on that.
I think it's important.
I'd love to hear, because, I think that's a great opportunity to understand the importance of design in doing some of these streetscape improvements.
Right, and I think it's easy to say, oh, we can just replace the street and put a sidewalk in and throw a couple parking spaces in, but that's not what good design is about, so.
Again, I'm gonna go back to when I said authenticity. I really feel the first step in the design is really understanding each, program, each place that you go and create something unique to it. Really honor whoever's living there and understand their goals, but really create something that stands out. Once you start with that, all of a sudden the palette of your design starts to explain itself. And then just like, again, what the well-designed residence or a home or a building, once you start to create a strong vision for that design, all the other materials fall in place. But as you were saying, Mark, people, and I'm gonna go back to that entertainment, people are wanting to get out there and to basically have different experiences all the time. And so that's why when you travel, we're looking for other experiences. So in our own place, when we're designing, we realize we wanna create the stage so those experiences can evolve. When we're walking down the street, as I mentioned before, and what you've said, can't have the office on the ground floor, because you do want that entertainment, you wanna see things, you wanna participate. What's great about your town, and I saw tonight when I came a little bit early, how people can easily navigate through the town. I saw people out using really bikes, just hanging out in front of Starbucks with the bikes and their pets. And it's easier to navigate that way than to even actually drive and park. Seeing that also is another huge pull that you're just expanding again to the community and having this environment. So, I mean, good design steps back, it really looks to see what is this place about? How can we build on it? How can we give the people that live, work there, what they need, and set the stage so that over time, as it evolves, it easily evolves and grows.
I wanna say one thing too that hasn't been said tonight that I think is really, really important, that we talk about. We've dibbled around the edges of it, all evening, but, good design doesn't just happen, it's very intentional. But everything that we've been talking about tonight is public sector. And we haven't really talked about public versus private sector. But the spaces that we're talking about, the spaces in Farmington, these are all public spaces. There are very, very few places in the world where private sector dollars can do grand public space investments that benefit the public. Then, you know, there's all sorts of metrics that have to come together, and like I said, there's very few places. Most places, including a place like Farmington, this is what public sector has to do, is to try and create that attractive infrastructure, try and create that environment where the private sector can then also come alongside and invest and thrive, start to grow TIF revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a momentum that begins to be created. I believe we've got that momentum now in Farmington. We didn't have that momentum 15 years ago. We also had a little thing called the Great Recession that we were battling against, but we're past that now. But I think that distinction between this is all public sector spending that we're talking about is important, and it shouldn't be left unsaid.
I want to follow up on there just with just a subtlety, but it's exactly right. I think Sue speaks about the importance of the design of all these elements that make the streetscape, and Steve's point about the private sector is really key. In order for a city to really be sort of cooking at all cylinders, I mean, really making it happen at all levels, that interaction between private and public needs to happen. It can't be one or the other. It has to be the public infrastructure and the public space and all of that, but also the private sector needs to feel invited and aware of the place that they have to participate. And what I'm getting at is a very clear plan that's backed by the city that says essentially, we want you to come here and invest in our community. We want you to come here and build a mixed use building that's 4 stories tall, that has retail on the ground floor and housing above. And we want that. And because the synergy between, and I use the word, maybe it's overly used, but there's no better word than this idea of synergy, because it's the sort of interaction of the public and private, of the pedestrian, of the live, work, and play. It's all of these things that start to work together that really make a city very successful. And when you see a successful city, and when you go there and you say, wow, this is a great place, and look at the investment, and look what's going on, and I wanna walk here, I wanna live here, I wanna work here, I wanna play here, that's because that synergy's happening. That's happening, and it's evident. And if your city isn't there, you wanna find ways to get it there. So I think that where your deficiencies are, if you have great public space but need more private, investment, how can you encourage that? Vice versa, or what have you? Because I think that your ultimate goal in any city, Farmington or any small city, big city, doesn't matter, is that synergy cooking at the highest level possible, and that live, work, and play so it's active 24-hour, 7 days a week. and it's working both at the street, when you're walking across the street, and you're walking down the street, and it's working when you live there, and it's working when you work there, and that's when it's happening. And that's frankly what you're seeing in downtown Detroit right now. And when you go downtown there, and I've been working downtown for my entire career, started working downtown as an intern, and I see all of that happening now that wasn't happening before. And it's that synergy that's so critical, and you have to have it. It's daytime, nighttime, weekends, it's all the time. And so that's the goal, and you have to find ways to really achieve that.
And frankly, that is precisely what the DDA is for, is to help foster those synergies.
It is a very unique economic development tool. You know, the TIF capture in that public-private partnership, it's appropriate for that sort of synergy, as you say, to happen in an incubator like this. It wouldn't necessarily just happen on its own privately or publicly. And when you do partner on projects that you've identified through extensive planning, you've just rolled out our master plan, we're about to publish it in November. We put a lot of thinking into it. So we're planning short-term, we're planning long-term, we're considering all the uses and the places we'd like to see them. So it's not just popping up. And it compounds. I mean, the investment that we're seeing and the work we've done in the past, we're looking always into the future and looking at that macro view of what we would like downtown and the entire city and community to be. We're looking at connections into downtown. We're looking at a switchback park connection into Shiawassee Park, potentially.
To connect our two parks.
Connect our two parks, right? I mean, envision a corridor that goes all the way up to Heritage Park in Farmington Hills. We're on the Rouge River. We're on this Grand River corridor, which is a huge interurban track. It's a Native American trail. I mean, these are things that we've been sort of building on for 200 years. So it's not by accident that we're identifying little pockets that we'd like to see higher density residential development, or we have a business mix list that includes a grocery store that's walkable for our downtown communities, or even a pet store. Although we don't have a celebrity pets, like in Birmingham, we wash our own dogs in Farmington. We're thrilled.
Well, and I think, the Farmington Road streetscape is part of this conversation. It's the why. And, it clearly, with what's been demonstrated on Grand River, it's going to impact it in a way that nothing else is going to. And we'll build it and they will come. And I believe that's true based on all the things that have been said this evening. So the other thing too, before I turn it over to question and answers, was you mentioned, Steve, that you wanted to touch base on, I assume, MTC?
Well, Kate sort of referenced it just a minute ago, but you talked about Farmington Road streetscape, which is sort of the completion of, or the second phase of the Grand River streetscape. We've got sort of two core roads through Farmington that define the downtown edges, and the other project that we've been looking at, some of you know what the MTC is. It's the old school building behind the Methodist Church that's kitty corner from Starbucks. That building, the city's actually currently under contract to purchase that building. It languished for many years between the school and a developer. And so the city, I think, has taken a leadership role in this regard and is going to be able to do a public-private partnership with a developer where a portion of it will be developed in a great mix of higher density housing that we desperately need here in Farmington. But then also an opportunity for us to do something that I've heard residents asking for since I got involved here nearly 20 years ago, and that's to connect these two phenomenal amenities that we have that are side by side, and yet if you're in one, you basically don't know the other one exists, and that's Shiawassee Park and our downtown in Riley Park. And right now, to get from one place to the other is incredibly difficult unless you're quite fit and willing to risk the stairs. Many of you know what I mean by the stairs. But imagine if that hillside is opened up and there's a beautiful, gently curving path, not a ramp, just a gentle slope sidewalk that eases its way through a series of gardens all the way down the hillside and across the river. And visually, you've opened up downtown now to Shiawassee Park. So if you're in the park and you're playing baseball, all you have to do is turn and look, and you can see the path up to the ice cream shop or your car where you just parked, because we also need more parking in downtown Farmington. So there's a lot of opportunities with that project, and we'll be looking at those in months to come as well.
Thanks,
I
Steve.
probably just answered somebody's question.
Yeah. I'm guessing you did.
This is the part where Mark announces that he's opening a pure Detroit store in downtown.
No pressure.
Breaking news.
All right, well, let's open it up then. I see a lot of hands going up. We're gonna steal somebody's mic here. And I'm gonna run around, I guess, so. All right, so we'll start one on this side.
Hi, thanks, everybody. So the farmer's market is great, and I use it to invite friends and family from the whole region who come and play in Farmington on the weekends. And what does the master plan have for programming in the other months that the farmer's market isn't open? Did it include programming?
That's a Kate question, and I took her mic.
Thank you. So stewardship is huge. Cultural programming is a big part of what we want to see downtown. And we do have this like symbiotic relationship. The farmers market is city-owned, and Walt does a great job at managing it. We, at peak harvest season, see up to 4,000 people on a Saturday morning. So that's a lot of terrific trip-generating joy in buying produce and lots of things downtown. We do know that Riley Park is experiencing increased use. So I'll just, for the last few weeks, you've seen it. If you walk through right now, it's gorgeous. We have volunteer-driven decor from, we had more than 100 volunteers participate in our Harvest Moon celebration. This is the 15th annual year. So we host that party for 3 consecutive nights this year in downtown. And we squeezed in, we broke everything down. We set up the farmer's market at 5 a.m. I know because Walt called me at 5:45 because we left a car or something in the way, just checking in. And then we broke it all back down. We set up the Harvest Moon celebration again. In between, we hosted Veg Fest, which brought a few thousand people into downtown regionally. That was a new event. So they enjoyed being here because they had identified that we have a unique mix of food stores. We have New Kombucha, we have Cheese Lady, we have Chive Vegan Restaurant, Sunflower Bakehouse, even Fresh Time Market. We're getting that mix that's drawing and that's feeding on the success of the farmers market and vice versa. We know that our little ice rink that we have for winter programming has grown in use. We strung up some lights designed pro bono by Steve. Thanks, Steve. I don't know if people know that. That Steve's firm quietly designed that for us, and the DDA installed it. So that lights up our ice rink. We had isn't that great? In the programming in the park. So we're seeing our ideal is to host and let others produce it. We find that if we're producing everything, it's just less cool. We like people to bring us a party, and we feel that we're a great space and a great atmosphere, and so we encourage that. We had Thistle Rose Academy produce Shakespeare in the Park a few weeks ago, and that was something that was a very short-term plan. We got the call, can we accommodate it? Of course we can. We had a Chevrolet commercial filmed here last October for Christmas. So can we come shoot a Christmas Chevy national dealership commercial downtown? Mm-hmm. You're right, yeah, for sure. We decorated for Christmas in October. They came in with an ad agency from New York. They strung holiday trimmings across Grand River. It turns out you have to ask permission from MDOT and City Council for that, but the answer may have been no, so we just did it. But it was done well, and everyone pulled together, and I think that we had the support of all of our municipal departments, the entire community. So things like that, we're always open for opportunity. So yes, we had a Harry Potter skate. We had 700 people show up for a Harry Potter themed skate. That was a really short lead time in prep, and we were overwhelmed. Our local restaurants sold butterbeer, people sold out. So we're definitely escalating in the mix that we have downtown. So bring us a party, we'd love to host it.
My turn?
Yes.
Thanks, yeah, I have the mic. So I think for a lot of us, one of the ways that we can best participate in a lot of what this discussion has been about is gonna be with our votes. You know, we get to vote for city council, and we know that election's coming up, and I'm just kind of wondering, you know, if you might be able to speak to kind of what happens before the ribbon cutting ceremonies, you know, when we have something new coming out, and before the bulldozers show up. It seems like something else needs to be built among key stakeholders, you know, the DDA, among the various people on city council. What is your experience, and what is the importance of trusted leadership, say, in terms of being an architect and building consensus?
Mark, can you take that? I mean, we could tee it up for Steve, you know, but what do you find in another community?
You were mentioning that.
Well, I think that it's very important that you have a strong and evident vision. I think having a vision for where your town, whether it's the downtown or other urban districts or neighborhoods, so having a vision which is ultimately some type of master plan that's very, very clear and embraced by the community as much as possible. I think that's a really critical component, and that means really getting people involved to participate, to help to develop it, and to create a certain awareness of what it is and what the value is to the community if this vision is implemented. And then I think if you can achieve that, which is a lot to say because it involves a lot of people and a lot of public interaction and what have you. But if you can achieve a clear and logical and implementable, if that's even a word, vision, meaning something that the development community can embrace and the city can embrace, then the implementation of that is critical, which means that the leadership, Steve, has to be steadfast in implementing it. So you need to elect leaders that are backing it and want to implement it. And that's really critical. And I think because what you ultimately will have is, no question, there'll be people that are for it, against it. There's going to be a mix, and if it's a well-founded, well-thought-through, and logical plan of action, then you stay on the path to implement it, and that's really, really key. So implementation is as critical as creating a good, solid plan of action that really is thoroughly thought through and thoroughly appropriate, not only embraced by the city, but also that is a logical implementation, meaning the private sector and the public sector can see it happen. But having the leadership carry it forward is really key. One of the things that is an example that I've been involved with, I was first appointed to the planning board of Birmingham in 1997. So I've been involved in Birmingham civic leadership for 22 years or so. And I was on the planning board for 10 years, and in 1997 we did our downtown master plan called the 2016 plan. It was a 20-year plan. It was very clear what was intended at that time, and our plan was done by an international firm. Andres Duani and his firm DPZ did our plan, and it was a well-done plan, very thoughtful, and it embraced both our public works but also the private sector. And I felt like part of my job on the planning board was to understand this plan, and when projects came, to implement it. And that was a critical point, not only I believed in, but the other planning board members believed in. And we started implementing that plan. And amazingly, that plan became aware by the public, and you talk to people and they would say, oh yeah, the 2016 plan says this, 2016 plan says that. It's like the public knew what the plan was called, and they knew elements of it, and they knew when you got it done and didn't. And it was a really critical part. And then when I became elected on the city commission, served, you know, in that capacity as I am now, you know, I carried that on, and my colleagues did as well, the other commissioners. So we really believed in the plan, and when we'd have public meetings and we talk about the plan, we could always refer to it and say, well, the 2016 plan says this, 2016 plan says that, and the public would sort of say, oh, yes, it does, okay, and then they would really embrace it with us, because everyone was sort of seemingly, not everybody, of course, there's never a complete, but we had a real awareness of keeping on the same page, and I think that was really critical. So wherever that can be achieved, it's going to you'll find yourself in an implementation that's very positive. And that should be a goal, I think, of any plan. Master plan, district plan, neighborhood plan, what have you.
And I'll just add on to that. I agree with everything Mark said. You know, everybody here tonight, obviously, we're talking about downtown design. But, you know, also as mayor, and Mark, you know this as well, you've got a large city in Birmingham. There's a lot going on. The downtown is sort of the core, but you've got a lot of other commercial corridors, down Woodward, for instance, and neighborhoods. And, you know, we, last year actually, because we were sort of sucking fumes from the recession, and some of you may know that everybody's property values dropped. And with the laws in Michigan, the revenue that the cities maybe once had, they all of a sudden don't have that revenue anymore. And in some ways, you know, the law that we're under in Michigan is kind of makes sense, because then it leaves it up to the municipalities. All right, well, what do you want to do? You just lost all this tax revenue. Well, our community decided that they were gonna increase 3 mills. And it's turned out that a mill of that is going for operations to continue we have a very high level of service in Farmington. And our residents really enjoy those high level of services. That's one of the reasons they choose to live here. But we also had new projects that are started in the early aughts, thanks to Sue Grissom and her firm. And there has been a consistent vision that we've been trying to stay focused on, and as we're able, we're trying to enact those things. Farmington Road Streetscape's a great example of that. I mean, that, believe it or not, that was designed nearly 10 years ago, that streetscape. And so here we are almost a decade later, and we're still trying to get it going. So yes, I have been persistent and consistent in trying to make these things happen, but also understanding that you know, it's a sizable city, and there's needs all over the city, not just in the downtown.
So I have a little blast from the past. I just dug this up. This is our Streetscape Smart magazine. It was promo for the Grand River Streetscape in 2008. So more than a decade ago, and it's filled with little gem articles. Valerie Knoll was the mayor. She wrote a really compelling argument for why we should invest in public space. There's an article here which is amazing. It's called Farmington's Epiphany is at Hand by Greg Cowley, DDA president. It's great. But it talks about everything from business recruitment to walkability to business retention, and these are all the same points that we're making right now. You know, these are the pieces that we're talking about more than a decade ago. It's time to invest. And there's a little article in here, Improvements are the realization of a long-held vision, and it's by Steve Schneeman, the lowly design committee chair. So anyway, a lot of work has been put into this.
It was a long-held vision 10 years ago.
And it's just also, you know, really cool to see some of the things that were happening 10 years ago in Farmington and our downtown community that are still tradition and that we've built upon. Everything from business mix to some of the programming. So.
Great. Let's take another one.
As a resident of Farmington, in fact, one that was here in '94 until 2003, and then moved back here in 2010, when the economy kind of went down, we were very impressed in looking at the area, just what had been done in Farmington in that period of time. And how.
You noticed.
We did, very much noticed that, and it really kind of lifted our spirits in terms of saying, you know what? This is a community that's really going forward and not just languishing as to where they were and living in their past. And that impressed us. So since that time, I see, you know, as Sue was talking, you know, all the things that were done at landscape, you know, cues that are put in that kind of create memory as you walk around the city. All that stuff that is great. One of the things that, of course, this city has a problem with that I think is different than what Mark is talking about in Birmingham is that we literally have basically one level of retail in a lot of the area. Even though we're seeing second floors up there, that's really not very functional space or very usable space. Whereas in Birmingham, they've got multi-levels above most of the retail that's creating either office space or residential space that creates action during the day period as well as the evening period. Having this concept of creating the multifamily in the old school, I think is a great move forward. But has there been any thought given to any other areas of the city that we could create some more high-rise or some more dense kind of residential or even perhaps office space? Because the retail obviously is successful if there's day activity as well as night activity. So in order to move, in a sense, ourselves to another level or to raise that level up so that we can draw more mom and pop spaces or more retail spaces around the city, and you know, because there are a few empty stores, you know, we have to kind of create the success possibility for that. So
That's a good question.
I'll let you make your comments on that.
Yeah, I can answer that. The answer is emphatic yes. We do have plans, and when we work on it, we've got not just a master plan. We have downtown vision plans. We have parks plans, and they all work together comprehensively. And I see Kevin Christensen here, our community development director, and he sort of is the manager of those things and continues to keep those updated from a citywide perspective. But he'll tell you and he'll show you, and I think you need to stop by his office, but we have identified, not only in the downtown, but also in the sort of spokes of the Farmington Road, Grand River going each way, in some of the commercial centers, we've identified areas where we would like to see higher density and literally taller spaces where we're starting to utilize some of those third and fourth floors that we know we can handle here in Farmington. I anticipate that what we end up with over here at MTC is going to be probably at least 3 stories, potentially even 4, maybe 5. I think you need to be involved with our master planning committee, so inviting you now.
Okay. Next
Hi,
question.
thanks. So I've only been in Farmington for the last 7 years, and a lot of the discussion has been about the walkability of the city, and right downtown, you know, between Farmington and the Dress Barn, Grove Street, there are a few crosswalks, and it seems to me there's a lot of confusion when people are driving through. I see people stop at the light at Grove, waiting for pedestrians. I see people rushing through on Grand River, and that it's dangerous, right? And then on Farmington, there's like one crosswalk, right, at the CVS, and it's great that we've put in those lights. I think that's fantastic, but there should be more, I think. And even going east on Grand River, right? We used to live behind the slider bar. I have to walk all the way to Grove Street to get across the street legally, or I have to go down to Power. And there's so many businesses that I could have just hopped across the street to access, but you know, I don't really want to die. So, or even Shiawassee Park, there's only 2 crosswalks. along Power and Shiawassee Street to get to the park from any of the residential sections. Do we have any plans to enhance that, to make it safer, to make it more clear, to add? Yeah.
I have a calibration statement. Before we lived
Yeah.
in Farmington, we lived in Delft, Netherlands. So
Yeah.
if you've ever been to Delft, that's our bar for walkability, which is walkable.
Yeah.
We lived there for 5 years with no car, and it was
Yep.
the most liberating experience ever.
Yeah, and I think just, I don't know what our laws are, I don't know anything about, but is there a way we can enhance our walkability by making it safer, by making it more accessible to cross these streets in more places? Because, Farmington doesn't end at Farmington and Grove Street, right? Anybody who's living west of Farmington, south of Grand River, there's no good way to get across the street, right? Except at those very specific lights and things.
Well, you bring up a really excellent point, and there's a couple things I want to say about it. First of all, having lived in Delft.
It's not fair.
It's not fair.
Well, no, you understand walkability.
Yeah.
There are people that think that Farmington is very high on the walkability scale.
Relatively,
And yet
yes.
you've got a completely different perspective. Your points are perfectly legitimate, and I agree with them. One of the challenges is we live in the Motor City.
Yes.
So the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
people perceive walkable in the Motor City, especially across a trunk line that is governed by the Michigan Department of Transportation, which cares about cars
Yeah.
moving through spaces quickly and safely, and not so much about pedestrians. They're changing very slowly, but this is a government apparatus that has been around for many decades doing the very same thing. So we do have some headwinds in that regard. You're not wrong about there being some confusion. You may know we just passed we tried to lessen the confusion by strengthening our ordinances, giving our public safety officials more ability to start to enforce by having a crosswalk ordinance that was passed, so that now, we never used to have signs that said stop for pedestrians, and guess what? People didn't really stop.
And they're writing tickets.
It's better today than it was even just 5 years ago. We've lived downtown for 20 years. I raised 3 kids here, and believe me, we had many close calls, and it was a lot of training to teach them. You don't just walk out and expect people to stop.
Right.
Not here. So it's a slow process. I ask you to bear with us, and I think you also need to get involved. Because those are the kinds of things that we talk about, and I'm incredibly passionate about, so. But thank you for bringing that up.
And to add a few elements of this Farmington Road streetscape, designed by Sue Grissom, there's a really beautiful median that would be installed as a resting point
nice.
for that safe pedestrian crossing.
Mark talked about the shortening the distance between curb to curb for pedestrians. It's pretty daunting to try and get across 4 lanes of traffic, but when you introduce a median in the middle, and all of a sudden you've got to get across maybe 12 feet, okay?
That slows traffic down too, right? I've read that
Indeed.
when they put medians and bump outs and things like that, it actually makes people drive.
The little island here at Farmington Road, just north of Grand River,
Yep.
has done it gets the snot beat out of it. It does a very good job of slowing traffic down that's coming through Farmington.
I just wanted to refer to a point on implementation, which I spoke about a few minutes ago, and how key that is. And just as a side note, something that we recently did in Birmingham that may be something of consideration. Maybe there's something like this that you already have, but this is an ongoing issue in just about any North American city. I mean, there's no question. I mean, I've ridden my share of bikes and walked the many streets in the Netherlands. And it's a very, very high bar, one of the highest bars in the world, no question, for pedestrianization and non-motorized bike path. A few years ago, we started really getting serious about implementation of non-motorized planning in Birmingham and increased walkability. And I think it was noted as, we were identified as, I think the 5th most walkable city by the Wall Street Journal in the country, a small city, small suburb. They called it a small suburb fifth most walkable in the country. So we don't take that lightly, and we obviously have worked hard to get even noticed at that level. But one of the things we started implementing a few years ago was the idea of increased implementation of these things. Now, granted, as Steve said, some streets are owned by the county, some streets are owned by the state, some streets are owned by the city. You have to recognize that you don't have full control over everything, and you have to sort of nudge, push, or beg, or whatever you have to do to some of these
All of the above.
organizations. And they are increasingly getting better, there's no question. We have Woodward going through the center of our city, and Woodward is an MDOT, Michigan road. And we constantly are pushing them to make it more pedestrian oriented, because it literally separates two sides of our city, and we have people living on one side, want to go to the other, and we've made some headway, but there's always a challenge to that. So I think as residents, you have to recognize the challenges of that, which are just inherent to understanding the sort of, control in the government situation. But one of the things that we implemented recently, a few years back now, is we did a master plan, going back to planning. We did a master plan, which we call the non-motorized master plan, or the mobility plan for the city, which is the idea of recognizing where we would and how we would create a hierarchy of non-motorized activity in the city, where we would put priorities for bike paths, sharrows, connections to other trails in the area, what have you. And we created that plan, and then we recognized that we would like to implement this plan and also implement increased walkability, not just downtown, which we're already doing and other districts like the Rail District and the Triangle District and neighborhood areas. But throughout the city, we want to increase walkability. So more crosswalks, more bump outs, more areas where when we redesign it, we diminish the distance from curb to curb. All these things are happening throughout our city and neighborhoods, as well as sometimes we put islands, pedestrian islands in between. I mean, there's a number of different things that we can do. But we then, to implement this plan, we created a subcommittee called the non-motorized committee. So it's a committee made up of residents, biking experts in biking. That's one of the criteria that we have. Someone who has some background in biking, some involvement, and other building owners, what have you. And that non-motorized committee goes around. It's a mobility committee, essentially. It's our mobility committee, and their job is to actually implement the plan. Whenever we do civic infrastructure, streets of any sort, what have you, it goes through this committee, and the committee constantly looks at our plan, looks at best practices, the NACTO guide, the ITE guides, all these different guides that are national trends, and looks to implement the best possible way, because we're gonna implement it, we're gonna pay for it. City's gonna pay for it, or state or the county's gonna pay for it, and we wanna push them to be doing the right thing for our city. So it's another layer of checks and balances, and the constant incorporation of making sure we're pushing in the right direction with a vision, going back to the vision point, of what we want to see in our city. Doesn't always end up perfectly, but we're pushing constantly to make it better and better and better. And because of that, we've had sort of, a lot of successes along the way. And it's a constantly evolving thing, but I think we're much more pedestrian oriented now than we were when we didn't have this plan and we didn't have this committee. And it's a process that I think is constantly getting better, but it's one that other cities may want to consider for this kind of purpose. Exactly.
Well, I think we just identified our chair of our soon-to-be formed non-motorized committee. So Todd, be sure to get her name.
You gotta create the committee first.
Go ahead.
So I got married to my husband and moved to Farmington 3 years ago, and was eagerly an engaged citizen. So I read all these plans, and I sat and I scoured them, and I looked at the different versions of all the different local areas that were kicking in ideas on the master plans. And then I started mentioning them to neighbors, and not every, but a lot of people were saying, oh, they've been talking about that forever. And so I was getting a lot of that type of response that made me feel a little bit discouraged that these great ideas that we're talking about with actually making Farmington Road ADA compliant, or connecting Shiawassee Park and helping with the Maxfield Training Center. I know that you all are dealing with a lot more roadblocks than we are ever going to be aware of, but
what can we take away as an optimism to think that some of these things may happen, or that there's momentum, or that I can tell a neighbor, no, like, we're gonna see some things happening in the next few years.
Wow, you just lobbed.
Good job. I think we have another committee member.
Yeah,
Good for you, Amy.
well, without, you know, I don't wanna risk getting here political here, but, we talked about how long the Farmington Road streetscape has been on the book, so to speak, designed long ago, as a part of this plan that we're trying to unroll. Yeah, we have been talking about it a long time. But, and we have a good economy right now, and our tax revenues are up, and our TIF revenue is up, and the city council identified the Farmington Road streetscape as one of its top priorities in its capital improvements plan earlier this year. The DDA identified the streetscape for Farmington Road as one of its top priorities in its capital improvements plan. We voted on it. It passed 3-2. So it was not a unanimous vote. With all of the tailwinds, there's still challenges that we face. So you're right, Amy, there are challenges, and I won't get into the nitty gritty of why, but you know, we're actually right in the thick of it right now, because the plan is, and I can share this because it was at a public meeting, but the plan is that the city is gonna pay half of the cost for this streetscape, which is expensive, and the DDA is gonna pay half.
Well, we'll decide tomorrow night.
Well, that's the plan. That's what our administration has actually recommended as the path forward. Our treasurers run the numbers, thinks that it's a good way to proceed for both. Obviously, that's a much bigger bite for the DDA to take than it is for the city to take. But I think what it represents is a good faith effort on the part of both of those groups to say, look, people have been asking for this. We've planned it. Everybody wants it. It's the top of everybody's list. Let's get it done. Yes, it's expensive. That's where we are. You know what? If we would have done it 10 years ago or 9 years ago when it was designed, it would have been half the cost. We didn't do it 9 years ago because it was too expensive then. And 9 years from now, it's not going to be less expensive.
Well, we had a grant.
And we had a grant that we lost. We're going to be back then. So we're actually, I could talk about this all night. I don't want to take the point. The point is, to your question, Amy, I'm encouraged just by seeing so many people here tonight that care about the downtown and care about design in the downtown, because sometimes I feel like, you know, there's a handful of people that really care and want these things to happen, and nobody else is really interested. So just to see this kind of support is great. I'd say contact your council people and your, you know, folks on the DDA and let them know that this is something you really support and it's important for the community.
I want to encourage you though, we're lucky to work with several different downtowns and projects, and Farmington has been one of the communities we worked on that have gotten quite a few things done. And, no, okay. But I don't want to take credit for when they keep saying, well, Sue's company designed that. No, it's the design committee. We've worked, you know, throughout all projects with the design committee, a very strong design committee, and very, like especially Steve, pushing forward. I mean, it's been a wonderful experience because things do get done here. There's many communities that we're still spinning on. So you're in a really fortunate situation to be in this community. And like they're saying, you know, join in, everybody join in on the district committees to push forward. That's gonna help tons. But I don't want you to be discouraged. This community is really proactive, and just even the momentum when things stalled out, your downtown is the businesses that Kate said have come in as a result. It's just still building momentum regardless. So I just want to encourage everybody to participate, and they're in a great spot.
It is about participation. You know, up here in the front row is Claire Perko. Claire's a landscape architect, and she's lived here for just a couple of years, I think now. Just a year. She's got 2 little ones at home, and yet she dove right in and got involved, and she's a part of our design committee, and she's using her landscape architecture design expertise to benefit the community. Yeah. So it's people like Claire and many others, you know, I look around the room, I could just keep naming names. Joanne McShane, who served on council for so many years and was instrumental in making some of these things happen. And then, as a private sector person, actually invested in the downtown to help with that public-private partnership and create those synergies. Invested in new building facades for downtown and helped bring in a wonderful brewery that everybody loves. So I could go around the room, but it is people getting involved to try and keep that momentum going. Because at the end of the day, it's us, and this is it.
I have to state one thing as a elected and appointed official for 22 years. I have to say the importance of your voice. Do not underestimate the value that you bring to a position on something. Either come to the meeting and stand up and say, you know, I live here for so many years, I really want to see this street better. Please do whatever it is that you think needs to be done to make it better. Your position, coming to a public meeting, your position, sending an email or writing a letter or making a phone call to your elected or appointed officials, believe me, I can tell you, I've sat in many, many meetings and watched the power of the individual change direction of the decision making. Sometimes for better or for worse, but it's clearly an important power. So don't underestimate the value of that. And if you believe strongly in something, then come and make yourself your position known.
Thanks. Okay, we're gonna take 2 more questions. We're gonna take one over here, and then we're gonna take yours.
Hello. So my question is, with the emergency